What is going on, everybody? This is SCPCRNP, aka Lack of Lepers, and thank you so much for joining us tonight on our stream reaction series. And we're gonna get into it. Last night we started a new show, and let me pull it up on the screen just here for you. This is So You Think You Can Fanon, and they do a series of SCP interviews, and this one, which I just thought was great. Is S D Locke, and so I haven't listened to all of this. I'm excited to finish it with you guys, and yeah, we'll get into it. But before I do, I just want to take a second just to splurge, just a little a word for the day. Something really weird has happened since the last time we met, and it's not this, which was weird. The excision of a sebaceous gland that was plugged. Don't Google that, and if you've got a weak stomach. But that happened, so that was weird. You know, I watched it. I watched the whole thing because that's kind of who I am. But that's not what I'm talking about. I came across sort of like a yearbook of sorts. It was from about 14 years ago, and it wasn't a yearbook per se, but it felt like one. Because I came across some old videos that I used to be involved in with a group I used to be involved in about 14 years ago. And 14 years for most of the people who potentially are viewing this, is probably before you were an adult. But, I'm so old that I was well into my adult years 14 years ago. And so the point of me bringing that up is just that it's so surreal. It's so nostalgic and strange to go back and see the people, remember the names that people have from those times long ago. And it's just so interesting to sort of project that into the future regarding where we are right now in this moment. So, 10 years from now, I hope people who are posting, containment fiction to the SCP Wiki can look back and be like, oh, I remember that person. Oh, I remember that guy, And so it's those little things that just make me so happy, I guess, to see such a community that is tight knit in some ways, and that a lot of these people, especially these young people, I know from experience, will look back, in 10 years, 15 years, and be like, wow, like it was crazy. I remember that name. Like, what are they doing these days? What are they up to now? And in some cases, you can even catch up with these people. It's really, really interesting. So all that to say, that's going to happen to us. It's even going to happen to you. And it's going to happen to you in regards to me. You can be like, oh, I remember that motherfucker. I remember that dick. All right. So let's get into it. Let me share the screen here. Just crazy. When you live a long time, it gets really weird. All right. So here we are. Let's do it this way. I guess that's okay. We're on a little different of a site. I just didn't like how the last site operated. So let's pick up where we left off with S D Locke on the So You Think You Can Fanon podcast.
Like you have interview logs where like they talk with her and stuff like that, and it's not all like bleakness all the way throughout. Like she has like lighthearted moments. There's silly things that happen. Like she has like I said, like a more well-rounded character, because it's not all just like on just trying to make you feel bad for that. It's more like they're building her a personality and letting you learn to
He's still talking about she, I don't know, I'm sorry, I should have looked that up. Locke is talking about SCP-3009, which we talked about at the tail end of the last show.
Empathize with them.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that does. I mean, you do have that as a challenge. It's one of the big challenges that you have to face. Is there any specific challenges or things you learned when you were creating your first SCP?
Oh, wow.
No, my first one was pretty straightforward. I mean, I do try, because again, like I said, like I really enjoyed this whole project and the amount of creativity here. So I do, like, with certain things, like I really try to push and challenge, like, especially during like contests and stuff. Like that's my favorite part about participating here. For instance, my 001 proposal that you guys read. That was for the 3000 horror contest originally.
I didn't know that.
And there's a self-challenge for me there to say, like, okay, I'm going to do a second-person prose horror story. And make it actually work as an SCP itself.
How y'all doing tonight?
5999
Y'all doing
was
good?
a different view because the SCP format, you put a full story into the context of documentation. So I thought, okay, well, what if we could further crunch things down by putting like a single set, have like a single section within the article be an entire self-contained story. So 5999 is a challenge to do, like, essentially is an entire horror anthology in a single SCP file. So like I always try to like do.
So, you know, my philosophical differences with Locke really collide. You know, the only point of contact they have are with things like SCP-5999 and SCP-6500. And 5999 was, as everybody knows, a hell of a trip to read. I remember exactly where I was when I read 5999, and it's a heck of an article. It doesn't feel like an SCP because I think it tries to be something else. And he basically just said that. Sorry, Locke. Locke basically just said that. That it was let's push the envelope essentially, which is nice. But you know, by the point you get to expanding the boundaries for something like SCP-5999, you know, at what point have you exited the building? You know. At what point do you break the concept in pushing on it? And, you know, 5999, you know, it's debatable, I think. It's debatable. It really doesn't feel like an SCP. It feels like something else. It does feel like an anthology, but just not one that's really at home on the SCP Wiki. I know that's kind of crazy to say since I think it came in like second place or something like that. But yeah, and then SCP-6500 took that even to another order of magnitude, which to me was just a little ridiculous. It's really not, it doesn't read like an SCP at all. It reads like a choose-your-own-adventure fanfic, or like a script to a video game. It even has music playing. I mean, so, you know, at that point, the whole idea of keeping yourself in character, which is a difficult part of the writing, you know, I mean, if it's completely thrown out the window at that point. You know, you've excused yourself from the challenge, and so that's what I mean when I say, you know, it's one thing to push the envelope. We all do that. We're all artists here. You know, we all create things. We all know and very well the necessity of pushing the envelope and doing something different. You know, going out on a creative limb. But you know, you really have to temper that with the fidelity, the strict principles, the fundamentals of whatever it is that you're working in. And so I think that articles like 5999 and you know, SCP-6500, I don't think they do that very, very well at all. And my real issues with 6500 are a little less on the side of what it is as like a conglomerate of talented authors who are simply trying to offer something by sheer number and sheer social capital, particularly to win a contest. But it has more to do with like how the authors react to being criticized in their methodology. 6500 was particular in that, you know, if you attempted to sort of critique the methodology, you know, that was happening behind the SCP, and of course that does have something to say about the actual content of the SCP too. It does, you know, it does reflect that somewhat. Then, you know, it was not good. It was not good. It was hard to get that through without being dogpiled by the authors themselves. And so once again, the sheer number, it's sort of like, you know, economy of scales, sort of like just ganging up on other people. So yeah, you know, I think true creativity comes from setting boundaries for yourself, setting restrictions for yourself. So, you know, I kind of frown on things like SCP-5999 and SCP-6500, which are really not SCPs once you get that far.
Different things, and you know, further see like how I can do wild shit.
You basically wanted to push yourself with it, which I think definitely paid off. It's a very unique
So
SCP.
why exactly did you decide to take you said Daybreaks was a 3000 contest entry. What made you want to change it to 00?
Oh, well, it was in the contest and it was doing pretty good just because the horror of the story. It was a horror. So it was doing pretty well for that. However, there was a few just upset at the idea that this could win the SCP-3000 slot. And with the pros intertwined with the story, they were like, oh, well, we don't want this to kind of set the example for us moving forward. So people were downvoting it, not based off of not liking the writing. Oh, this is really great. But so after a little while of that, I was like, you know what? Fine. And I just deleted it. And I put it as a proposal.
It's kind of sus, not going to lie, of them to be doing that.
What a good attitude.
Is there
well, it's funny that he said that, or that everybody is saying this, is because, wow, I mean, I didn't realize that happened all the way back in the 3000 contest, because it really showed up again in things like the 5000 contest, and I think really every contest, right? I mean, definitely did on the 5000, because I can recall people saying that on Sewell's entry, which was that murder mystery sort of played straight, but just is so damn good, It doesn't matter that it's played straight; it's just so good. A lot of people in those comments were like, "This is a really good SCP," but I don't think it's, I don't think it's really should be the spot, and so that was the reason why it wasn't upvoted. And then that really came to a head at the 6000 contest, where it was on SCP-6500, I do believe, where people were saying things like, "Well, this is an interesting article. It's high quality. It's obviously done with a lot of technical skill. It's technically gifted and competent. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of collaborative artistry going on here. It's very unique. There's a lot to celebrate, but it just doesn't feel like it should be sort of the definitive slot, because people have this sort of idea, even though it's not technically true, that an ex-con entry sort of sets the tone for the next series. I don't really think that's true. I mean, obviously that's sort of an artificial punctuation and an artificial demarcation to make. So, for example, I think that most of Series 5 probably took more notes from SCP-3999 than it did from something like SCP-3000, just for example. So, is that a weird reason to not want something in the slot? Well, maybe, but is it a valid reason? Well, of course. Yeah, I mean, this is about the contest, If you don't want your article to be judged in the context of whether or not it's the best for the contest, the best candidate for the slot, don't enter the contest. Just enter that article after the contest is over, and that way it'll be judged simply by its content and not its context plus its content. I mean, in some ways, you have to judge K-contest entries by their context, because otherwise, how would you know if you've satisfied the contest requirements? So that became kind of a big deal for the 6K, and that was the first time that I know of that the staff actually stepped in and discounted downvotes that were based off of that very assumption, that very sentiment that Locke is talking about, which is odd because the staff punished people for explaining their downvotes, which is kind of weird. So they only were able to take away downvotes from articles that people were like, oh, I like this, but I don't think it should be 6,000. The staff took those downvotes away. They disqualified those votes on that basis. So they decided unilaterally, which they don't have the authority to do. They should not have the authority to do that. They certainly don't have it. I mean, they just gave it to themselves. Basically just drew a line in the sand on what is a pretty complicated discussion as to voter rights, the role of expressing why it is that you want to vote one way or the other, whether that's a benefit or, in this case, it was a liability to those people who took time to explain their downvote, such that staff disqualified their participation because of it. So it was a really awful move. I think it was a really short-sighted move. I think it was a serious error on the part of the staff. And unfortunately, the participants in something like SCP-6500 were, as far as I understand, sort of the main proponents tooting that horn very loudly. You know, that we shouldn't be counting votes. You shouldn't be allowed to downvote this because you don't think it fits as the winner. So it's interesting to hear Locke talk about this, because it seems as though this is sort of a perpetual wound for Locke in some ways that harken back to at least as long ago as the 3000 contest.
Like, can anybody submit a 001 proposal? Like,
no, I'll just answer that technically for you. No, I mean, I guess technically you can, but like technically, no. So you really can't. No one who has submitted a 001 has not been an established author that people know and who has a high repute that I know of. Maybe somebody can correct me, but nobody who, like, let's say, came on the site and just plopped out a 001 has ever done that successfully, as far as I know. Okay, which tells you something, because if you imagine somebody who can write a 001 really well, let's just run a thought experiment and say that they wanted to do something very bombastic with respect to marketing and sort of extracurricular sort of epigenetic sort of cool factors that go into posting a 001 on the site, and decided to do it with a brand new account, but it was written by, let's say, somebody who's been there for a long time, just kind of a ghostwriting sock puppet account, which happens, by the way. Would it be celebrated? I don't know. It's a really good question. I think the only evidence, the only data point that we have to look at here is that, as far as I know, no one who has a 001 in the SCP Wiki isn't someone who is just really well established, whether by a lot of commercial success or just longevity. So, take that for what it's worth. Can you post a 001 if you're a nobody, if you're brand new? That's a great question.
Is there like a little bit like a higher standard to getting one on there?
Yep.
There's definitely a higher standard. Like, people, there's the vote threshold. Like, everything is put to a vote to. So I mean, you could do a 001 if you wanted to, right out the gate, but they're just looked at a little bit more harshly, critically than.
I don't know though. Are they? I guess they should be. They should be at a higher standard. But whether they are or not, I don't know. That's a good question too.
Other articles are. So
do you know if the wiki has a defense against possible. Like downvoting? Because like, what happens if me and 11 other dudes decide that this one SCP with 0 upvotes just shouldn't be on the site and we all hit downvote?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at any page's
Funny story.
Vote history and going to the bottom, and then there's another side site operated by this user named 59 SCPPER.com, and that actually has full analytics for the entire site, stretching back to its creation. So you can look at, like, let's say you did that.
Yeah, it's sad. It's sad that the project of Skipper was just so cool. I mean, it's like obvious in a way, but like such a feat, of coding and just an idea of execution. But unfortunately, it seems to sort of have been bent to upvote accounting. Whether that's seeing who changed a vote here, changed a vote there. That's kind of, I think that's, I see people use it that way a lot, like to look at long-term upvote trends and to get a little more microscopic when it comes to data on who voted what. And I know the staff particularly use this site to do exactly what they're talking about, which is try to identify what they call malicious downvoting, which of course there is no true definition of. It's simply what they assume, whatever meets their threshold of whatever it is that they want it to be. So it's not really standardized at all. Don't know if it could be, but that is to say, there's a lot of leverage. There's a lot of real estate when it comes to staff wanting to identify something as malicious downvoting.
Out of the blue, just 20 people got together, all your friends, and downvoted something. You know, somebody could just look up that page on here and say, oh, well, this all happened at the same time. Obviously, these people are like,
Gotcha.
you know, brigade. They could,
except when an article just comes on the site. That's the only time where a quote-unquote downvote brigade is like understandable, because everybody sees the article and goes, oh, well, that's crap. So what that means is if you wanted to game the system, if you had a rival or something like that, what you would do is just, sort of stalk their sandbox, and then, whenever that article comes out, have your cohort of voters ready and just immediately downvote it. It might not survive, and it wouldn't technically be malicious downvoting because, it's brand new to the site and everybody's going to be voting on it at once. So just a fun little life hack for you there.
take action from there. The staff could.
Because there was this one article we read. Which one? What? It's the one where like the two satellites go on Tumblr. Yeah, you know what I'm talking
27,
about.
21?
Yeah, that one I know had been like locked
the satellite one.
from
man. You had to mention it, didn't you? You had to mention it.
Yeah,
that was one. And we took a look at it and we were like, yeah, I don't. This is good. Like this shouldn't be as controversial as it turned out to be, but
yeah, I agree with that. It shouldn't have been as controversial as it turned out to be. It was sort of collateral, sort of an innocent bystander that got hit with a lot of ricochet bullets and kind of unfortunately was in the crossfire, kind of walked into the crossfire, if you really want to get specific with the analogy, but certainly did not deserve the treatment that it got, for sure.
You know how people on the internet are.
Yeah, that was created, and it just it did okay. It was like 100 and something, and it did okay. It was just it sat around for a couple years, without much attention to it.
Yep.
And then some YouTuber saw it and put out a video about it, and it just caused hundreds of people and downvote it en masse.
PC or something.
Yeah, we try not to talk about that thing.
Well, I hate that you don't want to talk about it. I can talk about it then. You just left it wide open for me to talk about it, so I guess we'll talk about it. There's a lot of things that people don't know about that incident. There's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of false beliefs about that incident that really persist until this day. And as I talk here, let me bring up something. This wasn't my work. This was actually the work of someone who you might know, especially if you're on the SCP Wiki. There's an individual by the name of Cool Dude. So if you go to the SCP Wiki, Cool Dude, you probably know Cool Dude. Well, it's not showing up here. Cool Dude. Let's see, we can do this. 4chan history. Let's try that. Yeah, so this document right here, this is a essay on the site, and it's kind of like a supplemental thing to the history of the universe. So if you go to the history of the universe hub on the SCP Wiki, history of the universe, you'll see that this article right here, the SCP Foundation on 4chan and Edit This, and a couple of others are present. So Cool Dude, that's the name of the individual who helped out Harmony, of course here by her dead name. But you can see there are a couple of entries by someone named Cool Dude. And Cool Dude is known on the SCP subreddit as the Archivist, because Cool Dude is somebody who's very serious about archaeological study and the historicity of the SCP Wiki and major events. And so I say all of that just to kind of give you an introduction to the individual, but also to point out that Cool Dude is really active on our Containment Fiction Wiki, has done a lot of really, really thorough and good work, and this is one of their articles. So Cool Dude, when no one else wanted to do this because it was just quite a tall order, of course, a lot to sort of get through, and not a lot of it enjoyable at all. But Cool Dude was the one who wrote this article on that 2018 Pride controversy in June. Was that 4 years ago, basically? And so this has just a tremendous amount of encyclopedic factual data on that event. It really takes you through the whole sequence of events, the controversy, what happened, where things went, how it spread, sort of a post-mortem analysis for the drama and the social sort of ripples that this created. And so in doing this, we got a lot of very interesting data that not a lot of people know about. So for example, it was mentioned quite a lot at the time on the wiki that basically this was going to be the fault of an off-site cohort of invaders. So if you look at, I think we actually have that word in here. No, we don't. So here it is, SCP-2721. This is the article that they're talking about. So what the staff would have told you at that time is that applications are paused and the SCP-2721 article was locked because it was being maliciously downvoted. And so it's obviously unavoidable. You couldn't say otherwise, because the rating dropped just precipitously. It dropped like a rock. So here's a section on 2721. And I'm just going to read a little bit of this. Since its posting in 2016, SCP-2721, and this is what Locke was saying, had gained upvotes at a roughly linear rate. This rise continued for over a week into the Pride controversy. From June 17th and 18th is really where everything started kind of to ignite. From June 17th to 24, however, the SCP dropped from 157 net upvotes to only 68, a drop of about 57%. Staff, concluding that a brigade was taking place against 2721, suspended new applications to the site and placed the article in a newly created protected category, which disabled ratings. A raid was also concluded to have occurred on the subreddit. The decrease, this is the interesting part that we found out, because what you can do is you can go into Skipper, you can type in SCP-2721, which we probably won't get right now because this is a rather slow page, particularly when it comes to searching. But this is some of the stuff that we found out that not a lot of people know, and I'll just summarize it for you right here, right now. The staff at the time and people around that time and people even to this day will tell you that this drop in rating of SCP-2721 was the result of people who were inspired by this Mr. Medicare video and who came from other areas of the internet, like 4chan or like wherever this controversy was brewing, and then came on the site, sort of disingenuously to downvote SCP-2721. And that this was an invasion, a horde of an exogenous threat coming in and taking down 2721 for political reasons. But if you look at the details that we have in this article and elsewhere, you find out that that's not true. So what the staff did was that they went through Skipper right here, and they looked at everybody who downvoted it, because that's one of the things you can do. See, if you go down to votes, you can see this person downvoted it, that person downvoted it. And then what you can do is click on some user who downvoted it and find out things about that user, like how long they've been on the site. For example, this person joined in 2015. And so what the staff did when they were trying to identify who was responsible for this downvote raid and who they could ban because they were this like exogenous force that came on just to do this damage, they couldn't find a single indictment. I'll say that again. They couldn't find one person who had created an account to downvote SCP-2721. In fact, most of the people that they ended up investigating as a result of this downvote brigade, supposedly external, had been on the site for a number of years, several years. So the staff actually made a document that kept track of everybody. It was sort of a dossier, sort of an investigatory document. And I know I'm taking up a lot of time with this rant here, but I really want to pull this out because you don't know it, because nobody knows this. Nobody knows this but us. It's in our quiet little corner. It wasn't an external downvote raid. You can argue that it was a downvote raid, but you can't argue that it was external. It was completely internal. It was completely internal. And in fact, if we want to continue reading, it says, the decrease in SCP-2721's rating did not slow down with the suspension of new applications. So what does that tell you? It tells you that all the votes were coming from within the SCP Wiki. Because the whole point of suspending applications was to prevent trolls. This was said hundreds of times. And so they paused the applications in an attempt to stop the bleeding for this article. Because their assumption, which was a reasonable assumption, honestly, was that these people were coming in, they were applying to the site, they got admitted, and they went and they downvoted SCP-2721. But they paused the applications, and the rating drop didn't stop. It didn't slow down. It didn't slow down at all. In fact, you can see the drop right here. This is the 17th, and they closed applications at some point in here, early on in this drop, and it didn't really slow down at all. In fact, this line right here is really where they reopened applications, and that's when it leveled off. But this almost straight drop, which is unique, I think, in the history of voting analytics, was not due to people who were not already on the site. They were already on the site. So it continued to decrease. So I'll read this one more time. The decrease in SCP-2721's rating did not slow with the suspension of new applications. It continued to decrease after site applications were reopened, and per Skipper reached a rating of about 32 before being protected. But there's a little discrepancy. Site 17's bot Jarvis says the rating is a little lower than that. So I wanted to pull out one more thing. This is my blog, and it's, 18 things you don't know about the Pride controversy. And let's see if that pulls up. Shit. Really should have done this beforehand. Let's see. Things you don't know about the... Gosh dang it. Okay, well, I hate that I don't have this ahead of me. Bear with me for 1 second here while I find this, because it's important to see this. You can really go on this blog and scroll down like I'm doing, and you'll find, there it is, 17 facts you don't know about the SCP Wiki, logo controversy. And there's a lot of interesting facts on here that not many people know. It really corrects a lot of misinformation that still really exists about this topic. I'll give you another example that not a lot of people know about, is that this article was actually unprotected in March of 2019. So that's that's almost a year after the Pride controversy. And as you can see, if you visit the Skipper page right here on the screen, the most recent votes actually are on this day, March 5th, 2019. And so if you look at all these most recent votes, a ton of them are on March 5th, 2019. So what does that mean? What happened? Well, you can search the site, you can search social media with Reddit, and you will not find anyone announcing that they are unprotecting 2721 on this or around this date of March 5th, 2019. What that means, I think, is that this was sort of a unspoken unlocking of the ratings. And anybody who came by and participated in these ratings had been made aware of this unprotecting of this article by word of mouth. It wasn't really announced anywhere. So this was sort of a pseudo-spontaneous thing. And if you actually go and you tally up how many people downvoted this article when it was able to be voted upon again and tallied all the people who upvoted it, it's not even close. This thing got massively downvoted again in almost a year later, as soon as they quietly opened up the ratings again. Staff suspended site apps prior to the raid on 2721. This gives you all the data that you need to know to verify that as a fact. SCP-2721 was massively downvoted by existing members of the SCP Wiki. This goes into detail about that too, where it's not really arguable after you read this section. Staff incorrectly assumed the idea of an external raid on 2721. So, I mean, you could once again say that this was a downvote brigade, and you could say that it was sort of a political war, a political skirmish. But it wasn't like an us versus them. It wasn't like an, our side of the fence and then those guys. It was a civil war. It was a civil skirmish that happened with pre-existing members of the SCP Foundation. People who already were there. And then this one is what I'm talking about. Staff protected 2721 when pausing site applications didn't work. So they paused the site applications. They saw that it was still dropping, and so that's when they decided to protect it. Basically this was staff, preserving what was their political captain for the war. They couldn't let SCP-2721 go down because that would mean that they lost the political battle, right? I go on to a couple of more things here too, but I really wish I could find it. I really wish I had done a little more homework here so that I could have presented this a little more. Here it is. Staff members continued. Oh, no, that's not it. I wish I would have been able to get you a little more streamlined of a presentation here, but you really should go read this article. It really has everything on there that you would want to see, and it even includes the documents, the actual documents themselves that staff compiled, these dossiers that I'm talking about, and it has all the details of every single user that they looked into, and you can see for yourself that these people were not new to the wiki. They had been on the wiki for a very long time. In fact, if we want to just look at the people who downvoted this article once it silently opened back up in March of 2019, we see people who we know. Here's Crockett Lawnchair. That's a known person on the wiki. This isn't just like a nobody. So, I mean, the idea of that, that the only reason 2721 is as low as it is these days and was targeted, was because people are like transphobic is just an incorrect take. It's really lacking a whole lot of nuance. These people who were voting on the 5th of March in 2019 aren't evil transphobic people who are sitting there waiting for almost a year, checking independently to see if 2721's rating module would open back up again. That's not what happened. It just so happened that people don't like this article. I mean, my thoughts on it are pretty irrelevant right now, but Subtlety on this day. Subtlety is a very well-known person in the space. Downvoted it. So I mean, there's a lot of people who downvoted it. There's a lot of reasons to downvote this article besides its inclusion of gender philosophy, or its martyrdom as a political, saint or a political casualty. So there's just a lot more to the story than people know. I hate to hear Locke say that they don't want to talk about it because, there's a whole ton of information here that moves the discussion from just the simple mononeuronal interpretation of it being just a politically inspired, dick move kind of assault. And in some ways it was, sure. But that's not the whole story. There's a lot more. This is a very, very interesting occurrence in the history of the SCP Wiki. It's filled with a lot of interesting knowledge that you probably didn't know about. So I do encourage you to go read this and the article on my blog that I just mentioned. Rant over.
It's mostly like, it's basically every time somebody gets...
I was gonna say, so that just reminded me. I wonder how that dude, that Russian dude who tried to buy the SCP Foundation or whatever, I wonder how he's doing right now.
Buy the SCP Foundation? My man, these people don't know shit. It's okay. Hey, they're casual fans. Buy the SCP Wiki.
I think that's actually still ongoing. I know they won something. I don't really follow this shit.
Let me fill you in on that too. I hate to keep doing this. Actually, no, I don't. What am I talking about? I love this shit. Containmentfiction.net. Another shill. Actually, I wrote this one. So there's another one here. Stand with SCPRU. This is one of mine that I wrote, and it goes into the history of everything that happened. You get to see things that you've never seen before, like this, which is a photo capture of a documentation awarded to Duxon. This is the actual trademark pamphlet that he was given, documentation-wise, in Russia, saying that he's the owner of the trademark for the SCP Foundation Wiki. And so outcomes, yeah, you can read about all the outcomes, but let me just inform Locke, because Locke doesn't seem to know what happened. Locke actually gets this incorrect here. Locke says that that the SCP Wiki won and that it's still ongoing. It's actually not true. The SCP lost. The SCP, the suit was taken to, sort of the introductory courts, and Duxon, he didn't win because the courts basically decided that what Duxon did was not right, but they also at the same time said that they weren't going to enforce anything, which I guess is pretty typical for the Russian judicial system, which is pretty pretty fucked up. And in fact, if you look at, we have here, the Russian-speaking SCP fandom's reaction to the lawyer's update was mixed. To the lawyer on the VK is like the Russian version of Facebook. To the lawyer on his VK account, just say we fucked up. There's no need to trust you to protect the interests of the SCP, and now everything is fucked up. Duxon won, and the least you can do is admit it. People were pretty upset. If you go into the Russian site, where it's actually the site of this lawyer who was arguing for the SCP Wiki, who essentially lost. Everything is bad. You guys fucked up. So this is another thing to read if you don't know. So this tells you all the things you need to know. Basically, the SCP Foundation's case, their goal was to get the trademark removed from Duxon, and that did not happen. Duxon, as of now, still holds the trademark and will probably hold it indefinitely now. What Locke is sort of correct on is that the SCP side of the case is trying to appeal this decision. They can take it to the next tier of courts and try to get them to enforce the decision. But that's it's such a long shot. The more likely thing is that Duxon is not going to be re-challenged. And as of now, Duxon still owns and it can enforce the trademark of the SCP Foundation in Russia. So,
but they won something regarding the case, but there's still a ways to go before it's all.
Yeah, jumping back.
No one really took that as a win. I mean, like I said, there was a win in there, and that they said, okay, yeah, so what Duxon did was wrong, but what are you going to do about it? That's basically what the court said.
It
wasn't a win.
Whole SCP, we talked about 001, and I understand the very the scrutiny that tends to happen with those, because it's a little, it's a higher bar to set. It's like, it's 001. It's the first one.
Yep.
Are there any proposals that you specifically really enjoy by other creators?
Quite a few. Let me see. I think
there's a lot of good ones.
My favorite might be Kellinen's proposal.
Oh, great choice.
Almost solely due to the fact that it was the most hype fucking thing when it was coming out, because it was it was serialized. He came out with it. Yeah. That was absolutely wild.
Man, that must have been a fun time to be a participant on the wiki. Obviously, that was before my time, but that would have been fun to watch.
So earlier we asked you about.
I wish watching admonition serial entries was as exciting as Kalinin 001. It's not. I hate to say it. I don't know if there's going to be anything like that again. Can anybody capture what Kalinin did again in that way? I doubt it.
Anime and the Vidya. Have you ever read just general horror books like Edgar Allan Poe? I can't remember if you said anything about that earlier.
Yeah, probably when I was in school. I haven't read much since I've gotten out of school. ADD, I guess, for that. Kind of like why I read a lot of shit here, is because it's something I could pick up and put down in 10 minutes.
Isn't that great? See, that's one of the beauties of containment fiction, and not to say that it should always be short, but when you get to the point of self-indulgency, that you are just really exceeding the length of novellas and things like that for your own self congratulations. Once again, that's another moment where you've probably gone a little too far. You've probably broken the format for bad reasons, and you've probably need to take a step back, because there are certain qualities about this genre that make it unique, and those are the things that we should be really championing and empowering when it comes to writing in this genre. So, other things have done it better. If you wanna just toss what's unique about the genre into the wind and run back to what people have already done for centuries. I guess that's one thing you can do with the SCP format, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Oh,
yeah, my concentration's terrible. I got what is it? I am having an absolute brain fart.
No rush.
All right, brain fart over. House of Leaves. I got House of Leaves really.
What'd I tell you? I told you that last
haven't,
time. House of Leaves.
I just got through the prologue of that.
And Ito.
Creepy.
Two guys.
I haven't ever read that. What's it about?
It's like there's a
I can't say I've never read him.
Passed away. Old man passed away, and they find like all these documents in his house about it was like a critical analysis of some film, but the film doesn't exist, and all the sources cited don't exist. So it like goes between like this guy's story and then the actual documents that he finds about this film. And the film's about a family that moves into a house where the internal dimensions exceed the external dimensions, and then just shit gets insane.
It's your typical
I'm looking
non-Euclidean space in there.
at because the name House of Leaves sounded very
SCP eats that shit for breakfast, man. There's nothing.
familiar, and it was probably because I heard about it through one of those horror YouTubers, probably Nightmind or something. And I looked at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's that one. It's got there's a lot of like weird things that specifically happened in this book. Like there is just like straight up sketches and Polaroids. Like there's times where like the pages are entirely broken into different like formats.
Yeah.
It is absolutely insane, and I've heard that
I haven't read it. I mean, once again, like I said last stream, House of Leaves is quoted by almost everybody in the SCP Wiki. I've been told that my writing is kind of was at one point kind of like that. I mean, it sounds like it's such an eclectic book that almost anybody's writing would maybe remind someone of it at some point. But yeah, so I mean, House of Leaves is like it's like 101 reading. I mean, it's like, those books you have to read before getting into school the next semester, or through the summer reading. Like that's what it is for the SCP Wiki. Everybody loves that shit.
it's a very good read.
Must
if
be
you're
good.
into horror.
Oh yeah, this looks great.
Yeah, it's insane. And
I've
beyond
heard of
that,
all kind of stuff like there's a page of like there's like a few pages that just like they're just filled with footnotes. Is that right? Like that's what I heard.
I also like checking out like online creepypastas, things like that. Diania House is probably the absolute my favorite out of all of them. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but that's like it's a whole bunch of blog posts like spread out on different websites, all detailing the story of this like messed up house that somebody's trying to find his lost friend that went.
It's all about houses.
Yeah, I was I kind of fell down that rabbit hole. Like I'm not super big into horror, but I like narratives that are able to convey feelings really well. So when I heard of House of Leaves, I was like, okay, I have to go check this out sometime, because I'm not super big into horror, but the way that the book is presented in this very unique format is something that I think is very interesting. I think is
House of Leaves the progenitor of all format screws on the SCP Wiki?
unique to kind of like the horror genre as a whole. Is there? I would say that like it definitely like SCP is kind of that same sort of boat, where it's like it's very unique in how it kind of is presented.
Yeah.
So I was gonna ask, like, I mean, how would you say writing in?
If you keep hearing that like high-pitched mechanical beeping noise, that's actually in the recording. I was sitting here, I thought my microwave was going off, but it's not. It's actually in the podcast.
SCP compares to maybe writing a usual piece of fiction.
Oh, this is a great question.
Like, what are the notable differences that you noticed?
Oh, what a good
when
question.
writing yours?
Wow, good job.
I think one of the main differences is just like, first off, it's just a lot easier than actual straight prose for me. I am just ass at writing straight prose.
Very interesting. Something makes me doubt that with Locke. I think Locke can probably write prose pretty well, but interesting answer.
But it operates on all like the same bits of logic. Like, you know, you use your special containment procedures to be somebody into reading the rest of the article. Like, you have the same attention to in terms of like pacing and atmosphere, depending on. And I say overall, it's really similar. It's just a matter of breaking it into a defined style of formatting.
I actually want to talk about that for just a second, because I disagree slightly. I've always thought that it should be harder to write in the SCP format, because what really is unique about the format, I mean, Locke is correct in that any form of writing will have those fundamental elements in it. It doesn't matter what kind of car you get, the engine is going to have the same components, right? It does have to do with pacing, it does have to do with atmosphere, it does have to do with arcing and characterization and manufacturing and architecture, of the structure of the story and things like this. But it's not the story about, I think, SCP and containment fiction, the genre, is that it's not the things that it shares in common with other forms of writing. It's those things that it doesn't share in common with those other forms of writing. And what I mean is that it's those things that by writing in the format, you restrict yourself away from. So why I think the containment fiction is such an interesting thing is because what it does is apply some rules that take away a large number of the tools in your usual toolbox if you're a writer. For example, you can't, if you're using that strict pseudoscientific clinical tone, you can't really do things like internal monologuing very well. I mean, you can do it. You can find a way to sort of smuggle that in to the format. There are clever ways of doing that, but just on the surface of it, that's kind of the point. You have to find a clever way to do that. You're really denied a lot of the more traditional tropes. You're really denied a lot more of the traditional literary devices and tools that are available for other forms of writing. Let's just say, for example, prose. So I think it's the removal of those things that make writing in containment fiction rather difficult. You no longer have the ability to write in second person or whatever it is, what Locke was trying to talk about just a second ago as a challenge. It's those restrictions, that define what the genre is. It's those restrictions that make it different from other literary attempts and literary efforts from the past that have been done ad infinitum. So that's really why I get so pissy when people, step all over the boundaries of the genres, because at some point you're not really writing in the genre anymore. Once you found a way to smuggle in something like fan fiction by just sort of nominally slapping on the letters SCP and sort of arranging it in the sections of containment procedure and description, you're sort of you're not really advancing, you're not really operating in the actual uniqueness of the genre. You're trying your hardest to make it more like everything else. You're really diluting what makes it unique and encouraging it to resemble the things that people have already done for millennia, not millennia, but centuries. Clinton said this. Clinton said that Clinton felt as though he was talking more about the collaborative nature of the wiki, of a lot of authors contributing to one project, as sort of the next evolutionary step of the novel. Clinton thought of the SCP Wiki, the collaborative project, as sort of that next step, something that would sort of supersede the novel and sort of take its place. The novel has been sort of the dominant figure in literary circles for a long time, and so Clinton thought that this was a unique and revolutionary idea because it sort of started to take that away from the novel. So, in my opinion, we shouldn't be running back to the novel. We should be pressing forward in what is new and interesting about this. So, that's what I think my answer would have been to this. And so I do agree with Locke, but I think the real crucial observation here is how containment fiction denies those things to you that a typical author would be more comfortable with, would be readily available to that author. And so I think that's the challenge in it, is that it should be a little harder. Now, if you're like Locke and you just can't write prose very well, and maybe this comes more naturally to you, sure. But when it comes to the scope of writing, it really forces authors to start over again and find new, difficult, painstaking, trailblazing ways to get around to the same effects, the same emotions, the same the same momentums, the same postures and punches that traditional writing can do rather easily. So just my thoughts on that.
Interesting. And how would you then say, like, how would you compare like an SCP tale to, you know, how you're usually writing SCPs? Like, what is the differences there? Where are some of the like paths that you take specifically to make it fit within SCP, but also to kind of not just be like another piece of fan fiction?
I'm honestly not even really sure. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank.
Fair. It was kind of a difficult question. I was, you know, just throwing it out there.
Well, I don't want to answer it for Locke again, but there is no difference. Like when you're writing a tale on the SCP Wiki, there's no difference between that and fan fiction. I hate to tell you that. That is fan fiction. It's fan fiction set in the universe of the SCP Wiki. So, you know, that's why if you ask people in our circles, and particularly me, if I think that tales are containment fiction, I'll answer no, because they don't really abide by those restrictions that make what I just ended up talking about just a second ago, that make containment fiction. Once you're writing a tale, you've really dropped all of that burden, those restrictions, those restraints, those constrictions, and you've moved back into, you know, the traditional style of writing, which I think is a good thing. You know, I think the difficulty of writing in containment fiction for the SCP Wiki sort of beckoned tales as an exhaust. You know, when you have that stringent of rules applied to your writing, you know, people just want to take it off, you know, for a while and like just loosen up, you know, breathe a little bit. And so that's what tales are, and I think they're a good part of the site. I think they're a necessary part of the space. But they're not, you know, proper containment fiction. You know, proper containment fiction is defined by the format and the restrictions. So, you know, I mean, if this question was asked of me, you know, if I could supply Locke with an answer in the earpiece, so to speak, for this moment when there was no answer available, that would have been what I said. There's no difference between writing a tale and fan fiction. It's just that one is set in some other universe and this one is set in, you know, the SCP universe with SCP set design and SCP climate and SCP characters, and that's it. That's really what a tale is. Which, by the way, incidentally, not to rant too much, but that's why I don't appreciate when authors essentially smuggle tales in as SCPs. I mean, because I go to the SCP to read unique SCP stuff, and unfortunately, people, once again, they don't do this maliciously, but they're trying to express themselves, but they're not principled enough to avoid reducing the genre and what they're trying to write in as something else. They don't know what they're doing. They're removing the identity from the genre. So you have a lot of people who will smuggle in fan fiction, you know, with the sort of adumbration or suggestion that it's being written as an SCP when it's not. When it's just a tale. It's just fan fiction. So I'll call that out every single time I see it, because that's the last thing we should do. The last thing we should do is regress what is a good direction back in the direction of something like fan fiction. That's really an insult to the SCP. The SCP is kind of like the Ivy League of collaborative writing, of you know, fictional writing, I think, on the internet in this day and age. And so, you know, the last thing we should do is move it back a few steps. We should be pushing it forward. I mean, why would you want to take a venerable brand like SCP and dilute it into a fan fiction? That's not really what I think we should be doing. All right, well, I want to thank you for joining. It's been about an hour, so we'll kind of call it quits there for tonight. Wednesday night, we don't stream. Recall that the new schedule starting next week is Tuesdays and Thursdays for these reaction series. And of course, we'll do the Friday night SCP article review as always, and we'll do our Saturday show, SCP Meta. Just look on the schedule on the Twitch channel for that. But so tomorrow night will be a break. I'll do some other stuff. I hope you have a nice night tomorrow night, and hopefully I'll see you back here on Thursday night, same time, 7:30 p.m. CST. Hopefully we'll finish up this interview. I doubt it. We're only 30 minutes in, and it's an hour and 30 total, so we probably have a lot more to go with this, but I love that. I hope you enjoy it too. yeah, thanks for joining tonight. Hope you had a good time. I always do. I love doing this shit. And so I'll do it again on Thursday. Hope to see you there. This has been SCPCRNP Snurp is how you say that, in case you're curious, aka Lack of Lepers. Y'all take it easy.